Good evening, and welcome back to Haunting the Fireside, a show about ghosts and other mystical things. Apart from being a means of getting to and from work, most of us drive for leisure, perhaps a night ride with friends, or a cross-country road trip with the family. And, while others drive for a living, some people within that category still manage to find some solace behind the wheel, even welcoming the solitude that comes with such a lifestyle. After all, it's hard to pass up the freedom of a wide-open road. But in our travels, we occasionally run into the weird, the unexplained, and the downright terrifying. Just the sort of things we'll be talking about tonight. Many of the tales featured this evening come from the book Trucker Ghost Stories, edited by Annie Wilder. To be sure, we will be driving into some scary territory, so buckle your seatbelt, roll up your windows, and lock your doors as we cruise along this haunted highway of nightmares. You're driving on a dark, winding road with no streetlights and no dividing line between the lanes. You have only your car's headlights to guide you. Rows of tall, thick trees lean toward the center of the road, their finger-like branches spread out across your view of the sky, acting as sieves for the rays of moonlight above. Whether you're headed home after a long day at work, or if you're a truck driver who's burning the midnight oil, you seem to have lost your way and don't know exactly where you are. Up to this moment, you've had your windows down, but as uncertainty creeps into your mind, you roll them up. You turn to the radio for companionship, to hear something other than wheels upon the pavement. But for whatever reason, there's nothing but dead air. As you carry on in silence down this desolate road, for you haven't seen any houses and can't remember the last time you passed another car, you get the feeling that, at any moment now, a creature of the forest is going to step out in front of your vehicle. A deer, a moose, or something else. Our first story takes us to a warm, clear night in the early 2000s. A truck driver, traveling at a late hour along Tennessee's Route 81, was around mile marker number 30 on the northbound side when a figure dashed across the highway in front of his vehicle. The creature, which he thought looked like a large dog, moved so fast that all he could make out was its silvery black, bushy hair. Since the event took him by surprise, he had no time to react. The dog passed out of his vision below the truck's hood, and then, presumably, under the wheels. There was, however, no impact. The truck didn't jolt or bounce, as he had expected it to when hitting an object of that size. As soon as he was able, the driver pulled off to the roadside to check for this dog, or what remained of it. The thing is, there was no dog under the truck. There wasn't even any damage to show for it. Looking to get a second opinion, the truck driver brought his truck to a mechanic the next morning and explained that he may have hit a dog on the road the night before. After examining the truck's underside from front to back, the mechanic concluded that the driver hadn't hit anything. Either the animal had miraculously escaped being crushed, or there hadn't really been a dog at all. Considering this experience as a warning of a fatal crash if he wasn't careful, the truck driver vowed that he would never drive late at night again, and that he would pull over once he started to feel fatigued. Could this experience have been a simple case of highway hypnosis? Of exhausted eyes playing tricks on the mind late at night? Or could it have more paranormal implications? Much like the infamous black cat in some cultures, literature, folklore, and mythology are rife with black dogs that signify future injury, death, or the presence of an evil spirit. In Goethe's famous play, Faust, the demonic character Mephistopheles initially presents himself as a black dog. And, while technically not a supernatural example, The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle involves a dog that kills the members of a wealthy family in the English countryside. However, Doyle may have borrowed this concept from the legend of the Black Shuck, as it is known in Great Britain. According to legend, the creature, a black dog in form, is said to appear in various locations, such as moorlands, houses, and pubs, and whoever is unfortunate enough to gaze upon it will soon meet their demise. As far as this particular account is concerned, the man's experience proved to be less harrowing than most other hellhound encounters. In fact, this one was fairly benign, and even caused him to change his driving behavior for the better. All the same, if you've been driving for a long time, it would be wise to take such things as a sign to stop somewhere, at least for a while, before it's too late. But if you need to take a rest from the road, make sure it's a place that has a lot of people, plenty of light, and no paranormal activity. Or else, you might be in for a terrifying encounter, just like the people in this next story. A woman recounts how she and her husband, a truck driver, had been on their way to Nevada to pick up a supply of produce when they hunkered down one night on a back road in Texas. While they tried to get some shut-eye, they kept hearing what sounded like someone walking around outside. The husband got up and circled the vehicle, but saw no one. They settled back into a comfortable position, only to be disturbed again, this time by a rap on the side of the truck. Arming himself with a gun, the husband went out to confront whoever or whatever was out there, which possibly had ill intentions. Moments passed, and the husband asked his wife to come outside. Reluctantly, she followed him to the back of the truck. Together, they stood facing the woods behind where they had parked. In the quiet of such a rural area, they could hear several indistinct voices emanating from somewhere in the distance. As they continued to listen, the voices seemed to move throughout the surrounding forest. This fact led the couple to rationalize that someone was having a house party in the area. Perhaps the voices of the guests were just echoing off the trees. But where were the lights? The woodland was pitch black. At this point, they were more intrigued than tired. The husband and wife re-entered the truck and sat there, allowing their eyes to adjust to the darkness. Minutes later, they saw a group of shadowy figures emerge from the forest and cross the road. When the husband turned on the truck's headlights, the figures disappeared. Wanting to put this mystery to bed, the couple, with flashlights in hand, walked over to the middle of the road, where the figures had been before they vanished. To his and her bewilderment, the dirt bore no tracks, and the tall grass on the other side of the road remained upright, undisturbed. Then, the voices from the woods started up again, and, just like before, they seemed to be without a discernible source. At their wits' end, the husband and wife decided to retreat, but as they did so, they spotted a man dressed like a Civil War soldier standing at the tree line. As soon as they laid their eyes on him, he vanished into thin air. Horrified, they ran into the truck, started up the vehicle, and turned on its headlights, which enabled them to see more spectral figures crossing the road in front of them. Without any further deliberation, the couple peeled out of the clearing and, after driving for some time, stopped at a motel, far away from that haunted back road. In the morning, the couple made an unsettling discovery. All over the sides of their dusty trailer was a multitude of handprints. In her account, the wife attests that those handprints were not there before they had begun driving, nor had they stopped anywhere between that back road and the motel. The prints had to have been planted there within the last several hours, but the only likely place was the back road, where they saw those ghostly figures and heard those disembodied voices. It is interesting that most reports of paranormal phenomena tend to centralize in isolated, out-of-the-way places. But we shouldn't think that such things happen exclusively on dark and stormy nights. For this next story shows that the angel of the odd visits us, even in the daylight hours. A trucker was driving on old Route 55 in eastern West Virginia when he, in his own words, had entered the twilight zone and lived to tell the tale. He had been on the road for quite a while, and so decided to stop in the town of Baker, where he could rest and have some refreshments. From there, he would continue westward and homeward. The man recalls how, at one point, he crossed a steel bridge that spanned over the Lost River. Despite being already somewhat tired, he had driven this highway many times before, and that, being familiar with the road, maintained that he hadn't taken any wrong turns. Miles after crossing the bridge, however, he started to realize that something wasn't right. First of all, he had gone 3 hours without seeing the next town. Second, he was going up hills and around curves that he had never seen on previous occasions. These observations caused the truck driver to second-guess himself. Did he take a wrong turn in his wearied state? Inclined to believe that he was now lost, he consulted his map to get a sense of what he should be looking for up ahead, or if there were any alternate routes that he could take. That's when he noticed that this road had some unusual features. The man found himself driving on an extremely narrow roadway, with no shoulders that he could pull off to, and no dividing line. There wasn't the slightest blemish in the pavement, no cracks, potholes, or tire marks, just an impossibly smooth, blank, flat hardtop. Perhaps the eeriest thing of all was that this road was devoid of another living soul. There were no animals, houses, driveways, or pedestrians. To add to this unnerving situation, he hadn't even seen another vehicle since crossing that bridge. Given the lack of turnoffs, and the fact that he had a large truck, he was unable to stop or turn around. He had no choice but to keep driving on the seemingly endless road. To the driver's relief, road signs began to appear, announcing that 2 towns lay ahead, Matthias and Lost River. His consolation, however, was short-lived. As he passed each sign, the miles piled up, but he only saw more of the same perfectly constructed road, with its dangerous curves and daunting hills. He entered and passed by Matthias, without ever seeing the town. Lost River also came and went, as though it were an invisible, imaginary place. Then, within the blink of an eye, the truck driver found himself in the middle of Moorfield. It was as if he literally teleported there. At long last, he feasted his eyes on houses, cars, people. He was back in civilization, and back to reality. But he was still puzzled, because his drive took 3 hours longer than it should have, and that he came into town through Route 55. This last point led him to conclude that he couldn't have taken any other turns, that he had never left the highway. 2 years later, the truck driver returned to that area with his wife and children. He wanted to show them what he had been through that day, so that they too could participate in the strange experience. Once more, he crossed the steel bridge that transported him onto that mysterious road to nowhere years before. On this occasion, however, the trucker and his family reached Baker soon enough, and made it to Matthias in a reasonable amount of time. He then drove up and down Route 55, searching for any secondary road that remotely resembled the original. He took a back road through Lost River State Park, parts of which did look like the road that he had originally driven on, but was not exactly how he had remembered it. After these experiments, the driver learned that he was unable to replicate his singular experience. As with the black dog sighting in the first account, there is the possibility that this driver had been experiencing highway hypnosis. But my reservation for accepting it as the explanation here is that the driver seemed to have been fully aware of his experience, given his apprehension regarding the circumstances. Furthermore, he was able to recall specific details about this span of time, crossing a steel bridge, the road's uncanny features, or the lack thereof, and the names of 2 towns through which he was supposed to have driven, but never actually saw. I myself was so intrigued by this account that I tried to follow the driver's course on Google Maps. Naturally, my starting point was what appears to be the steel bridge that he claimed to have crossed. I will provide links to the key locations so that listeners can see for themselves. I am curious to know whether there is any folklore from that part of West Virginia which can be tied to this phenomenon. I am also interested if any of you have had similar experiences while driving on Route 55. Vermont, the Green Mountain State, is home to over 100 covered bridges, monuments where history and romance meet. The quaint ski town of Stowe, in particular, lays claim to one of these last vestiges of old America, namely, the Goldbrook Bridge, a place that certainly has ties to history and romance, though of a more tragic and darker sort. Tucked away in Stowe Hollow and standing over the murmuring current of Gold Brook, it was built in 1844 by architect J.W. Smith. However, the legends that surround it began to circulate only within the past few decades. While several variations exist, the main story goes something like this. In the 19th century, a young woman named Emily fell in love with a young man and made her intentions to marry known. But this was met with disappointment, as her parents considered him to be unworthy of the match, and so refused to financially support such a wedding. Unable to obtain an official recognition of their marriage, the two young lovers agreed to elope and chose to meet at Stowe Hollow on a certain date. That evening, a hopeful Emily went out to the bridge over Gold Brook and waited patiently for her prospective husband to arrive. Minutes turned to hours. Those hours came and went. Time carried on carelessly, and the young man was nowhere in sight. As the night deepened and darkened, it became painfully clear that the man whom Emily loved had broken his promise and her heart. Overcome by anger and sorrow, Emily took her own life, either by hanging herself from one of the rafters inside the bridge, or by flinging herself into the rocky waters below. As with any site of a violent or emotionally charged event, rumors about the Gold Brook Bridge being haunted began to take shape in the late 1960s. Over the years, the bridge and the stories surrounding it have become practically synonymous with one another. Many visitors are convinced that the spirit of Emily remains rooted to this area. According to Vermont historian and folklorist Joseph Citro, people have reported observing a wide range of paranormal phenomena. Alleged activity includes cold spots in the bridge during warm weather, photographs that feature floating orbs or wisps of smoke that were absent before the pictures had been taken, disembodied voices, and full-bodied apparitions inside or near the bridge. Others have described feelings of disorientation, sensing electricity in the air, seeing scratches on the sides of their vehicle, and handprints that appear suddenly on the exterior of foggy car windows with no visible or identifiable source. Skeptics have argued that the story of Emily's Bridge lies more in fiction than in fact. One of the most glaring gaps between the myth and the reality is that no evidence of a person named Emily ever existed. At least, no one with that name was ever documented as having died on the bridge. Some sources have pointed out that in the 1970s, a woman named Nancy Wolfe Steed made up the legend of a haunted covered bridge to entertain local children and teenagers. If we examine the case more critically, we see that at least some of the paranormal claims can be explained by natural means. The scratches on the sides of cars as they cross the bridge could be attributed to the operators driving too close to the structure's inner walls. The lights that appear in nighttime photographs could be those of houses in the vicinity of the bridge. Lastly, the claims of paranormal activity could be due to the power of suggestion. Since the bridge has garnered a reputation for being haunted, staunch believers in the paranormal and highly impressionable visitors may expect to observe ghostly activity. When they experience something that appears to be unexplainable, they take it as a confirmation of their belief. Apart from casual visitors, a number of paranormal investigators have gone to Stowe Hollow in order to communicate with the spirit that supposedly haunts the Gold Brook Bridge. It is said that the optimal time to possibly witness ghostly phenomena is between midnight and 3 a.m. Some of these investigations are difficult, if not impossible, to verify, as sources cite the work of anonymous individuals. In an interview with a local news station, Vermont Historical Society Director Steve Perkins stated that a high school student brought a Ouija board to the bridge one night in 1968. The teenager supposedly contacted a spirit that identified itself as Emily, which appears to be an alternate origin of the Emily legend. In his book, Passing Strange, Joseph Citro mentions that a psychic went to the bridge in the 1980s and also tried to contact Emily's ghost with questions about her life and death. While these inquiries were met with silence from the other side, Citro notes that the woman picked up the spirit of a man who had been hanged near the bridge in 1876. More recently, people have conducted investigations employing modern ghost hunting equipment, such as EVP, or electronic voice phenomenon, and have posted their findings on YouTube. Among the many videos of individuals and groups trying to catch some piece of evidence for the paranormal, the majority of which come across as either unconvincing or are not intended to be taken seriously, the channel Paranormal Identification provides footage of a rather interesting investigation. In addition to film and photography, the two investigators, Blake and Mary, use a spirit box, which draws on radio frequencies in order to record the voices of paranormal entities that might be present, and a REM pod, a device that is designed to detect temperature changes, which is thought to be another sign of a spiritual presence. Throughout the session, Blake and Mary see and hear unusual things in the bridge, including disembodied footsteps, a male voice that seems to respond to their questions during the spirit box session, as well as the figure of a little boy hanging from one of the rafters. The most considerable moment in the video happens in the beginning, when Blake and Mary arrive at the bridge. Blake parks in the dirt lot on the other side and shuts off all the lights just before he and Mary step out of the car. There is a brief moment when Blake's camera shows what appears to be the head of a woman, partially visible in the rearview mirror, who had apparently been sitting in the back seat. This is suggested with a caption early in the video, but is not explicitly addressed until the end, after Mary had analyzed the footage. This is important because we are given the impression that Blake and Mary were alone at the bridge that night, and that they made sure that Blake's camera was unable to capture any view of Mary in the rearview mirror from the angle at which it had been placed. If these things are true, then no one else was supposed to have been in the car with them at the time, and that the figure could not have been Mary, but was possibly the ghost of Emily herself. I will provide a link to the video for listeners who wish to watch the investigation for themselves, and to come to their own conclusions about its legitimacy, as well as whether or not Emily's Bridge is really haunted. I am sure that everyone has heard stories of phantom hitchhikers, ghosts, that appear along the road and accept rides from a good Samaritan, only to disappear when the driver least expects it. As is well known, the recurring element in these tales, which are told around the globe, customarily involves a woman in white who glides along some lonely highway, sometimes near a cemetery, reliving the last night of her life over and over again. Between the towns of Rehoboth and Seekonk, Massachusetts, There is a part of Route 44 that is said to give free range to a phantom pedestrian. But instead of a white-clad woman, the spirit in question is that of a man with unkempt red hair and dressed in a shabby red plaid shirt. No one knows for certain who he had been in life, or why he supposedly haunts this particular stretch of the highway. What we do know is that Route 44 itself has been, and continues to be, like most other major roadways, the scene of numerous car crashes, and possibly as many fatalities left in their wake. With this in mind, it is likely that the red-haired hitchhiker of Route 44 may have been one of those casualties. Because of the paranormal appeal that revolves around Route 44, Massachusetts residents believe that this road is haunted indeed. In fact, there are locals who have their own stories to tell about the mysterious man in red. In the New England Ghost Files, Charles Turek Robinson documented the accounts of 4 people claiming to have had an encounter with a spectral hitchhiker. Joseph Wolfe describes how, one night in the winter of 1969, he was driving alone on Route 44 near Seekonk. At one point, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. Looking to his right, he saw a man's face peering in at him from outside the passenger side window. This frightened Wolfe, not only because a total stranger was staring at him, but also because of the sheer impossibility of the situation. Wolfe was traveling at around 50 miles an hour, yet this strange man was able to keep up with his vehicle without breaking eye contact or his serpentine grin. Splitting his attention between the road and this menacing wonder, Wolfe could see that the man had red hair and was wearing a red plaid shirt. Then, Wolfe swerved off the road and hit the brakes. By the time he stopped the car, the man had disappeared just as suddenly as he had appeared. Although this harrowing experience lasted only a few minutes, it would haunt Wolfe for the rest of his life. One summer evening in 1973, Fred Durpus was driving truck on Route 44 when he saw a man thumbing for a ride along the side of the road. Out of compassion, Durpus decided to give the man a lift. He pulled over and waited for him to approach. Soon enough, a man who looked to be in his 40s, with red hair and a red shirt, opened the door and climbed up into the truck. As Durpus started driving again, he tried to strike up a friendly conversation with his new passenger. But the man just stared silently at him, with a vacant expression on his face. Durpus was growing uncomfortable and began to regret his decision. After a few moments, the man smiled, but still without saying a word. With that, Durpus stopped the truck and ordered the man to get out. He eventually did, but instead of opening the door, the man vanished right before Durpus's very eyes. In February of 1981, Barbara Sutton was heading home after a visit at her daughter's house in Seekonk. As she was driving, she suddenly saw a man in the middle of the road. Since she was going about 60 miles per hour, she was unable to react and come to a complete stop. Barbara braced herself, but there was no impact. After pulling over, she stepped out of the car and walked around, looking up and down Route 44 for the man she thought she had run over. There was no sign of anyone or anything in the road that she could have hit. While she stood there, dumbfounded, peals of laughter emanated from the woods that flanked the highway. She raced back into her vehicle and sped off. About a half-mile later, however, she saw the man again, standing on the road in front of her. Barbara stopped once more, but did not get out of the car. Instead, she rolled down her window and gazed out onto the dark, empty street. Like the first time, laughter erupted from the woods. She managed to make it home safely, and, following this incident, she would avoid, at all costs, that haunted stretch of Route 44. At around 10 o'clock one October night in 1984, Harry and Sheena Hansen had been driving on Route 44 when their station wagon broke down. While Sheena waited in the car, Harry went in search of a house or a payphone nearby where he could call for roadside assistance. As he hiked up the sparsely populated highway, Harry noticed a man on the side of the road. This scene struck him as odd, for the man was alone, sitting next to the road at such a late hour. He also didn't seem to have a car. As he approached the man, Harry saw that he had messy red hair and left his red shirt untucked. Harry told the man about his situation and asked him for directions to the nearest house or phone. The man made no reply, but only stared and grinned at Harry. The longer Harry looked upon the man, the more the man's face changed, or rather twisted, as he described it. The man's pupils clouded over until the eyes were all white spheres in his head. In response, Harry walked away, slowly at first, then broke into a run. When he heard maniacal laughter from behind, he glanced back over his shoulders to see that the man was gone. Yet no matter how fast he ran, Harry kept hearing the laughter as if it was chasing him. It seemed to move all around him. Then it stopped. He returned to the car to find Sheena in a panic. She told him that when she turned on the radio to listen to some music, the song she had been listening to was interrupted by a man's voice. Initially, she thought it was the DJ, but then the voice called her by her name and mocked her, finally erupting into wild laughter. The couple eventually got the help they needed, as far as their car troubles went. However, they would be rattled by this horrifying experience for many years to come. As we ride off into the sunset of our journey, keep in mind that you may see many more strange, frightful things on the road, things that you might struggle to explain. And even if you lock your doors and roll up your windows, that doesn't stop the paranormal from becoming a passenger, even if it prefers to take the back seat.